Significant part of International Polar Bear Day is that we are celebrating moms and cubs. Climate change is the leading conservation issue impacting polar bears. We consider this a global conservation issue that really needs to be solved by all of us. And we feel like if we lower our greenhouse gas emissions across the globe, not only will we be conserving polar bears, but we'll be conserving ourselves and all living things. And so that is the number one threat. We've worked with 3M to develop something much smaller, much lighter, less invasive that you can use to track polar bears.
Looking at, what do we do to engage more corporations, more audience partners that can help us with this work, such as what we're seeing with Canada Goose today. And I think that's a big success. That has been a long-standing partnership that started, they came up to Churchill in 2006, and flash forward to 2025, what are we doing in the retail settings to get their community, their customers to get more involved in our work?
We'll start off with what is the significance of Polar Bear Day and how has it evolved over the years?
The significant part of International Polar Bear Day is that we are celebrating moms and cubs on this day. And moms and cubs are really important to a healthy population of polar bears. And it's at this time that the moms and the cubs are emerging from their dens. It's actually happening like literally right now, where the dens, where the cubs are emerging from the den for the very first time. And so we like to use this day to celebrate this critical period in the bear's life and hoping that they have a long and, healthy life.
That's beautiful. What are the biggest threats currently facing polar bears and how is PBI addressing them?
Climate change is the leading conservation issue impacting polar bears, and so we consider this a global conservation issue that really needs to be solved by all of us. And we feel like if we lower our greenhouse gas emissions across the globe, not only will we be conserving polar bears, but we'll be conserving ourselves and all living things. And so that is the number one threat, and that's really because with climate warming, we see a loss of Arctic sea ice. And the Arctic sea ice is where polar bears do all of the critical things that they need to do to survive. It's where they hunt their prey, specifically which are ring seals. It's also where they mate and also where they den in some places. There are situations where polar bears are denning on land. So we really need to conserve the Arctic sea ice in order to conserve polar bears.
Are there any sort of stats on the how the Arctic sea ice is being depleted?
Well, on average, we're losing approximately 13% of the Arctic sea ice per decade. Now, this isn't homogeneous. It's not that it's in some places, like in Svalbard, Norway, it's actually happening faster than that. But on average, that's how much sea ice we're losing per decade. So it's pretty significant. And one thing that we really like to stress to people, because I think sometimes they don't understand, that the sea ice is actually a living ecosystem. So there are things living under the sea ice, living in the sea ice, and the sea ice supports this whole entire food chain, not just for polar bears, but for everything living in the Arctic. And our analogy is the sea ice is like similar to the soil in a forest. And so if you take away this really critical part of the ecosystem, you actually have, a collapse of all things living there, not just polar bears.
How does PBI measure the success of the efforts?
Well, it's definitely, we have a challenging job actually ahead of us. But some of the greatest successes that we've seen, especially since I've been working at PBI since 2008, when I first started working with Polar Bears International, it might be really challenging to even talk about climate change. And so that's one area that we've seen kind of a big shift, right? We're not having to convince people that there's a problem. Maybe there's still a percentage of the population that isn't there yet, and we might never get them there. But we are seeing a large percentage of the population, no matter where you live, that really are on board and really understand what we need to do. And so that's been one big shift. And I'd like to think that we've played a big part in that, through the education outreach that we do, talking to people like yourself, the media, working with brands like Canada Goose to help us amplify that messaging, that we're making some headway. So that's one way. Other ways that we've seen, I think some really significant impacts are that we're working on talking about coexistence. How do people and polar bears live harmoniously in the same place? As we see less sea ice in the Arctic, we also see more polar bears on land. The more time polar bears spend on land, the more there is potential for conflicts. And so we're working really hard on that side of things, on the coexistence side of things. And that's really a lot of public education. It's looking at waste management, even simple things like that. And we're seeing a lot of headway there. And so I would say those are some real significant things that we've seen. And just advancing research, advancing using innovative strategies to study and understand polar bears. So I think those are some of the bigger gains that we've made. We're a hard science and research-driven organization. So we are funding research, we're doing our own research, and some of the bigger gains we've made, we've been working with 3M to develop what we call a burr on fur tag, because one of the ways that we track polar bears is using GPS locations. And so historically, that was done through putting kind of collars on bears to track them, and we've been working on inventing, kind of using the same technology with GPS location, but shrinking the package and doing more short-term monitoring of polar bears. So we've worked with 3M to develop something much smaller, much lighter, less invasive, that you can use to track polar bears. So that's something significant that's just starting to be implemented and used in the field. We've also been using technology that's been used in other industries, such as like the military. The military has long used ground radar to detect, if things might be coming into a place where they want to monitor. We're using that same technology where we can use radar to detect if polar bears are coming into a community. And that radar then can do all kinds of things. It could, if it sees a polar bear and starts tracking a polar bear, you can train the radar to make a phone call to a wildlife professional that can come in and manage the situation. It could send off sound or light to deter the polar bear away. So those are a couple examples. And then we've also been, most recently, been working on using polar bear genetics to really understand some of the changes that polar bears will be seeing in the future and how kind of flexible or elasticity like polar bears might have in certain regions. And so that's taking, samples that had long been collected from years of working, capturing polar bears, taking samples and then putting those samples into a bank. So I think this is really like an evolving and new science. We are funding a postdoc that's specializing on genetics. So it's really an emerging field in polar bear research of using these samples that had long been collected over periods of time to really look at polar bears and how adaptive they might be to certain kinds of changes. I mean, we know that they need the sea ice, but in maybe what areas are we going to see polar bears surviving into the future, and looking at things like genetic markers to kind of tell us a little bit more about that.
Fascinating. So yeah, for Janette, how does your background in marketing and business development support PBI's mission?
Yeah. So one of the things when she was talking about International Polar Bear Day, taking those awareness days and how do we leverage our partners, our supporters, our donors to amplify that messaging and really get involved in what we're doing, making them aware of what is happening, talking about it, utilizing our toolkits that we have, showing what they could do in their own communities and how do they influence change to help with the number one threat in climate change. So I think that's part of it. Also looking at, what do we do to engage more corporations, more audience partners that can help us with this work, such as what we're seeing with Canada Goose today. And I think that's a big success that has been a long-standing partnership that started, they came up to Churchill in 2006. And flash forward to 2025, what are we doing in the retail settings to get their community, their customers to get more involved in our work? And so I think when they're wearing the PBI Collection, what does that mean? What are they supporting, and how can they get involved? I think that's always looking at from a strategic perspective of how can we bring the science, put it in a way that the general public can understand and see what is happening in Churchill, what's happening in Svalbard or across the Arctic, and how does that impact them at home so that they're not thinking it's just something far away, but it's something that's truly happening in their community, and that they can be a part of the change and the action that it takes to make it happen. So I think that's a big thing.
What are the biggest challenges in getting people to engage with it?
I think, with anything, I was just talking about, the distance from the Arctic. There's, very few people are going to be privileged to go up and see a polar bear in the wild. But so how do we get them to understand? And, we're based in Bozeman, Montana, and you come to London, and there's all these noise and different competing messaging, and that's true anywhere. And so how do you take all that and get them to then stop and hear what's happening in the Arctic and really making sure that they can relate to it and feel compelled to act? And I think that, whether that is, like I was saying before, talking about it, feeling, motivated to support our work in a variety of different ways, so that we can continue to do the work that we're doing. Our brand promise is protect their future and our own, and what we're trying to do is make sure that they understand what's happening in the Arctic is a predictor to what's going to happen across the world. So, just how do we take that messaging and utilize them as our brand ambassadors and really amplify that message?
Krista, what inspired you to dedicate your career to this nonprofit and leadership within it?
Well, really, probably the biggest influencers in my life were my grandparents. When I was a kid, and I'd go visit my grandparents, we would always get outside. We'd go fishing and camping, rock hounding, skiing, and when I became an adult and started to figure out what I wanted to do, I decided to work. My first job out of college was working at a summer camp. And I had the opportunity to actually work with young people and really connect them to nature and hopefully influence them to also care about the natural world. And after I had that experience, I just knew that that was kind of my life's path. And I've worked in conservation really my whole career. And with the common theme and all of the jobs that I've had, it's really about connecting people to where they live and connecting people to nature outside of where they live, and hopefully making that connection that we're part of a system that's much bigger than ourselves, and we're part of that, right? Like we're not separate from that. And so that's really, in every job that I've had, that's been this common thread, right? And it's a big part of what we do. Of course, the research is important. All the work that we're doing with coexistence is also important, but also like getting people to be inspired and passionate about nature and this world that we really depend on, for really everything. And so that's been my life's journey, and I feel really lucky that, I've had the opportunity to work with specifically polar bears and Polar Bears International. I think for me it's this huge opportunity because we're talking about an ecosystem that actually every living thing on the planet depends on. I mean, the Arctic is the Earth's refrigerator, and the Arctic actually impacts global climate. And it can be the thing that helps keep a stable global climate, or it can be the thing, if we lose it, can be also the trigger to, for all of us to live in a really unstable climate. And so it's just a really great opportunity to take that passion and to, again, connect people that really our actions do matter, and it's important. Mm-hmm.
How did Canada Goose first become involved in 2007?
Yeah, no, prior to 2007, so that's when the first products, the collaboration between Canada Goose and PBI, came about in 2007. But before that, the CEO and owner of Canada Goose, Danny Reese, came to Churchill, Manitoba, and spent time on the tundra seeing polar bears. And that's where this connection between Polar Bears International and Canada Goose originated. And then Danny decided to make a commitment to the organization, to Polar Bears International, with the launch of the first products. And since then, they have been supporting our work. And so that's come through, having the PBI Blue products, where a percentage of sales go directly to the organization, that have hugely impacted our work. It isn't just the donation. Actually, they've, really helped PBI evolve as a brand and brought a lot of awareness to the cause of the organization. They've done that through multiple, initiatives. I mean, some of those have been, helping us raise enough money to hire our first full-time staff, because in 2007, Polar Bears International was an all-volunteer-based organization. So the funding of those very first products helped us hire our chief research scientist, Dr. Stephen Amstrup, who was, kind of a polar bear research icon. They also helped create enough stability that led to my position. Other initiatives that they've done in the time that we've worked there, they developed the Pantone for the PBI Blue. They helped us establish a permanent home in Churchill, Manitoba, by building the PBI house. We have done, most recently, we worked with Heider Ackerman. I mean, what a privilege to work with someone that distinguished in their field, to help represent and amplify what we're doing. And those are just a few examples. There are actually quite a few, but I think the other thing too that comes from the relationship aren't just the big initiatives that they've taken on, but really the day-to-day, the inspiring their employees to be ambassadors for Polar Bears International. Although we always like to say we're small, but we're mighty, and a lot of that might comes through like this kind of on the ground people who are helping to not only amplify what we do, but really to engage people in the action side of what we need to see, of like motivating people to realize they're part of the conservation solution. And so we just feel, really extremely fortunate to have worked with them over the years. And we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be where we are today without the support of organizations like Canada Goose. But they're really the leading organization that has helped us be where we are today.
So yeah, let's focus on the installation here. What can people expect to experience when they come to visit the store?
So I think that what they can expect is just to really get an immersion of the Arctic Lab and seeing a little bit about what we're doing, some of our work up in Churchill. I think one of the other things is to be able to engage with one of their brand ambassadors who are passionate about our collaboration. And so they can talk to the work that we do, introduce people to our organization, and help them get involved. Plus, they can have a cup of coffee while they're doing that exploration. So, it's, and then too, to see that collection that they have, the PBI Collection, which is the PBI Blue. So I think that's an experience of just starting to learn about why PBI, why Canada Goose.
So walk us through all the different things that we have there, and the telescope and stuff like that.
The telescope, yeah, there's 4 different videos that they can watch. One showing them about our work, one showing a bear tracker so they can follow Canada Goose's Tellini, their bear who is walking across the Hudson Bay on the sea ice. They can also see some of our research work that we do, and then just some other like cute moms and cubs videos. So everybody loves a mom and cub. So that's what they can see in there. Like I mentioned, there is the kiosk that has the coffee, and then there's areas where they can see the different PBI items.
What role does that storytelling that you are doing downstairs play within your conservation efforts?
It's huge. It goes back to that first conversation or question or second question you asked, is how do we engage people to care? And I think the one thing that we're seeing is that the blue brings people in the door to kind of see what's going on, and then we can engage in a conversation to say what's going on, and talk to them about, hey, check out some of the videos, read the little placards that are on this Arctic Lab, and just really start the conversation, because I think that's the first part. Because when we talk about all the noise, they're here in London. Unless they go to a zoo, maybe, they don't see or think about a polar bear. And so how do we get them to start to think about it, then maybe sign up for our emails and start to learn about the journey and learn more about what's happening to polar bears, and really start to care about it's not just in the Arctic, it's really what's happening here at home with me. And then starting to get them to engage in what could I be doing, from what I'm doing personally, but also ultimately what we need is what are we doing systemically? We talked about renewable energy and getting away from things that we've relied on. How do we look at our footprint, and what changes can we do? What influence? I think also getting people to stop to think, I can really have a hand in helping influence change. And so getting them to really be inspired and care about the Arctic. So I think that is the thing that we can do through these types of initiatives and installations. And I think the thing that Canada Goose does really well is from the moment that they onboard their new staff, that's a really important part of their culture. And so when you go downstairs and you talk to any of them, they're very enthusiastic to share that story, and that story is weaved in, and there's a real intersection between the history of Canada Goose and Polar Bears International. And I think it doesn't matter that that brand came from Canada. Here in London, it's as relevant here as it is in Toronto or anywhere else.
Looking into the future now, what future initiatives are there planned for the conservation efforts.
Well, one of
So-
the big things we're working on is the coexistence programs that we have, because we know polar bears will be spending more time on land as we lose Arctic sea ice. And the more time they spend on land, the more opportunities there are to have, potentially negative interactions with humans. So that's one big area that we're working in. An example of that is last year we led our first community exchange where we brought people from Norway and from the southern Hudson Bay to Churchill, which is considered the western Hudson Bay, where we did a knowledge sharing. We can all learn from each other. So, what is Churchill doing that maybe they could implement in Longyearbyen, Svalbard? And what are things that people are doing in Svalbard that are, effective techniques that can be implemented other places? So we're really working on that front. We're also building a guides kind of workshop training, because it's really important, just like the ambassadors here at Canada Goose, they have this opportunity to talk to so many more people than like our individual team could talk to. So we're working on developing a training where we train guides on really making sure that their polar bear knowledge and content is up to date and accurate. And so that information that's being disseminated can be, on point, fact-based. So we see that as a really big, important part of what we're doing. We will always continue to fund research. So right now we have a couple research fellows. These are people, early career scientists, but they're at the point in their career where they can be highly productive, right? They're smart people, they're focused people that can be doing important research. Our goal is not only to be doing the research, but to make sure that we do research that have outcomes like publications, with those publications potentially, or those specific research projects having the ability to influence policy. So we're also looking at like what specific project could we take on that might end up protecting moms and cubs through protecting denning habitat. So really looking at that, the research that can be very strategic, with not just like gaining a greater knowledge of polar bears, but also leading to like actions that lead to protection of polar bears. And then, we just can't talk to enough people, and we do that through a lot of media outreach. We do it through education outreach, because we do have a global climate crisis. And the way that we are going to solve that is not in the Arctic. I mean, it's really about engaging people that are visiting your platform and visiting you and learning, through different communities, right? Like it's, working with brands like Canada Goose, because they reach a whole different audience than we might reach on our own. So that is never ending, and so that's always a big part of what we're doing, but it's an area that we can't do enough, really, so more ambassadors, more opportunities to talk to people that we might not have the opportunity to talk to, and really motivate and engage people to not only care about polar bears, but care about, future generations. One of the things that we do is really try to bring the Arctic to people, because it is a hard place to get to, and a lot of people will never get to maybe go to the Arctic or see a polar bear in the wild. But we really try to connect people to the Arctic. We do that through, we have live cams. We have a live polar bear cam, we have a live beluga cam, and a Northern Lights cam that is in partnership with explore.org. You can log on and right now go see northern lights in real life. But in the fall, we have a live polar bear cam where you can tune in and see live polar bears. We also do a lot of education outreach from the field. So we're lucky that we have our own Tundra vehicle called Tundra Buggy One. And from Tundra Buggy One, we do live broadcast. And we talk to students across the globe. Not only talk to students, but we are also using the live polar bear cam to bring real live polar bears into into people's homes, while they're hearing from the world's leading polar bear scientists and climate scientists. And our goal with that is really to inspire the next generation, whether they're researchers or people that are working in the media, or even people working in design and innovation, to really inspire that next generation of leaders that we need to see to really tackle this great challenge that we have ahead of ourselves.
To finish off, just what can people do to help when they see this? What are the things that they can help to contribute to your goals and to do their part?
Well, first of all, we like to say we can just talk about it. And earlier you had asked, what successes we've seen. And we've seen, through people talking and sharing information, we've seen more people being interested. So just sharing information, sharing knowledge is super, super important. Then on the home front, the decisions you make as someone who's spending money, right? We make decisions every day in the businesses we support, the products that we buy. That is another way I think people can get involved. And Canada Goose is a good example of that. Like, I got my first parka in 2008. I'm still wearing that same parka because it's built to last a lifetime. And so those things matter, staying away from fast fashion, buying products that are built to last. Those are other ways people, can participate. Really thinking about the choices that you make and where you're spending your dollars, and supporting businesses that have a very forward-looking approach to the environment and conservation. So that's another thing people can do. They can visit our website. They can tune into our education programs. They can sign up for our newsletter. You can also vote. If you're of voting age, you can actively participate in electing people who are going to put the environment as one of their main priorities. Not their only priority, but it should be a priority. And so that's, a few ways that individuals can definitely act. And of course, then you can do all kinds of things like, reduce your energy use by, using LED light bulbs or flipping off your power, or if you're, buying a new car, maybe you look at, an electric vehicle, those types of things. So we need, those actions both need to be global kind of things that we can scale throughout industry and business. I mean, those are the ways that we're going to get the quantum leaps that we need to see. But also as individuals, we have the opportunity to participate in, driving that change.
Can I be as bold to say that the other two things that you can do is definitely sign up for our emails to learn more about what's going on. You're going to learn about the latest science, the impact that it's having, and then always you can donate to support our work. So that's always something that you can do.